Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys an update on my Clivia collection here. So I did a previous update video on these probably about a year and 3 months ago, back in December 2020. Basically these Clivia plants, they've been in my family for about 20 years. There was originally one plant, and then several years ago I divided them up to give them more space, and we got about 5 plants out of that. Then they were kind of living in a polytunnel for a few years. The problem was the light levels were too high and the soil was too wet and it wasn't free draining enough, so they were really suffering. I'll show you some photos of how they looked in December 2020, and as you can see they really were suffering. They just weren't looking happy at all. The leaves were very yellow, they were quite small plants, and some of them look like they might actually die soon. So what I did in that video is I transplanted them. I took out all the soil and replaced it with a fresh mix of multi-purpose compost and lots of perlite, so it was free draining but also nutrient rich. And then I put them in a shady part of my conservatory to make sure they weren't getting too much sunlight. Clivias naturally like low light levels, and if they have too much sun, the leaves can go very pale and yellow and the plant just gets stunted and doesn't really grow much. They've now had a whole growing season in a decent soil. Now last year they did actually flower, even though they'd only just been put in the new soil, and they had a relatively decent flowering. This year though the plants are much bigger, much healthier looking leaves, and I've got a few of these two at the bottom. They might also flower later on as well. So the plants are getting much bigger, looking much happier, but I just need to do a little bit of maintenance now just to keep them happy. So on some of the plants, like these smaller ones here for example, we've got quite a lot of dust building up. You can see dust on the leaves or watermarks that have been splashed into the leaves in the past. So what I need to do is clean the leaves off. There's also a lot of cobwebs as well, and on some of them the soil level is getting a bit low. You can see there's a few dead roots towards the surface. I need to top up the soil just slightly. This one isn't too bad actually. It's a bit more obvious on this one here. There's some of the roots are showing, so I need to top up the soil level. And it's also interesting to see, because they're doing quite well now, they're all still putting up new shoots. So you can see this here, this is actually a new shoot. Clivias, they look like they should be bulbs like an amaryllis, but they don't actually have bulbs, they have lots of tuberous roots. And what they do is they send up little side shoots, and that's where you can get a new plant from, and eventually you can separate it. You can see this one, these two on the right actually have done that, and there's actually 2 plants now in those pots. This plant will probably be like that by the end of the growing season. So what I'll do is to say I'll clean the leaves, take off any dead material, and I'll just top up the compost to make sure that they've got enough soil in each pot. So that's the plants now cleaned and potted up with the extra compost. They're looking quite good now, so I'm just going to take them into my house instead of having them in my conservatory. Enjoy them whilst the flowers are out. They normally last quite a long time, especially if you keep them cool, so I should hopefully get enjoyment out of these for about a month or so. And then once the flowers are finished, I'll cut off the flowers, put them into a shady part of the conservatory again, and they'll just have their summer phase where they grow lots of leaves. Then next winter I'll let them get cold again. It's quite important with Clivias that they get cold so that they can get the initiation for the flowering. Basically they're spring flowering plants, and if they don't get cold enough over winter they won't flower the next spring. So it's important that the temperatures go down to about 10 degrees Celsius for an extended period of time. That way they know it's been winter and they'll flower when spring comes. So that's why these are always out in a cold conservatory most of the year. And then the only other thing I really do with these is I feed them occasionally. I normally give them tomato feed just to help boost the flowers. Sometimes in summer if they're looking a bit pale I might give them a balanced feed or one a bit higher in nitrogen just to green up the foliage a bit more. But generally they're very easy to look after, and they just kind of look after themselves. They don't even need much water. They have thick succulent roots, so they're very drought resistant, and the main key to making sure they don't die is not overwatering. Very easy to overwater these plants, so I always keep them a little bit on the dry side. That's all from this update. I'm quite happy with how they're looking 1 year on. They're looking much healthier, and I'll just leave you with a time lapse now from last year when they were coming into flower.